Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. We'll give folks a few more minutes to join. And then we can, per my email, we can have a discussion around how to best proceed from here. But we'll give folks a few minutes to join and then we'll get things kicked off. All righty. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to kick off the meeting today and acknowledge the events happening in the world. We are in a moment. It is not an easy one. It is a difficult one. And as we saw just a few minutes ago, there is much emotion. There is much emotion occurring. And so we've seen that a verdict has been determined. And before we directly dove into the meeting, wanted to have a discussion with the task force as to how you all would like to proceed. We all process emotions very differently. We all process events very differently. And wanted to see from you all if you wanted to continue with having the task force meeting this evening, if you would like to postpone to a later date, and we can continue to move forward the regularly scheduled work, or if you would like to continue with regularly scheduled programming for us to conduct the meeting as usual. So we'll open it up to the floor for you all to provide your thoughts.
I think we should defer to the Black people on the commission in terms of how we proceed tonight, whether we go forward or not.
Thank you, Jemana. Does anyone have any other thoughts?
I mean, for me, I think we should move forward. I mean, this is, I might have had a different mindset if the verdict had come out otherwise. So, you know, it's more of a feeling of relief, but I think one of the reasons why this task force was put together was to work towards addressing some issues like this, if not, you know, so, you know, my thought is to move forward and just continue the work. This is a moment, and although, like I said, the conviction of the murderer of George Floyd is a moment of, you know, where I feel relief. It's also a moment where, you know, you need to continue, in my opinion, to continue to move forward and do the work, and that's what we're here for. Because there are hundreds and thousands of men who have experienced death, harassment, Black men I'm speaking of, harassment, death, any number of injustices. And, you know, that's what we're here to work to reconcile and to try to fix. So, you know, my vote is to do the work.
Thank you, Dwayne. Are there any other thoughts? Hearing none, do we have a general consensus on an opinion to move forward? If that's something that you would like to, since we're not following formal Robert's Rules of Order, I don't have to call a motion, but if we have general consensus, give a head nod or indicate on your screen if this is something that you would like to continue moving forward with. Wonderful. Okay, then we'll proceed. We'll proceed as planned. Thank you very much for the discussion, team. Deeply appreciate you all. Well, welcome to the April 20th installment of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. We are delighted to be with you all. This is a great joy and great pleasure. And so to kick the meeting off today, we will walk you through our agenda. We're going to go through where we're at, where we're going, and what we've accomplished. We will have a report out from subcommittees. Then we will hear an update from city officials. And then we will close out with preparation for the listening session that we have in queue. So you all know who I am. I'm Jevin Hodge. You have Jamal Holtz and Cordell Carter from the facilitation team, and we are supported by the remarkable Link Strategic Partners team, and they will be here to support you all if you need anything. And so we're going to jump right in today. Molly, can you cue up the slide deck, please?
And Jev, as Molly queuing up the screen, I do want to make a point that despite how the verdict went, it's still heavy. It's heavy on me as an individual right now. And if folks need to turn off their camera or step away for a few minutes, feel free to do that. Totally understand, and you have the space to do that.
That is right, Jamal. Thank you very much. This is not a one size fit all. So if you need to step away, you need a moment to breathe, you need to turn your camera off, do whatever works best for you in this moment. We have the recording from the meeting. We will be able to provide that with you if needed. And so, and thank you for your participation. Appreciate your participation. All right, Molly, let's move forward. So we're here, as you know, the charge for the task force is the Reimagining Public Safety here in Takoma Park, to develop recommendations to make Takoma Park safer, more livable community for all of its residents, with the emphasis on addressing racial inequities that exist in government and services evolving around public safety. You all have been tasked with that duty of having conversation here. Next slide, please, Molly. The timeline, just as a refresher, we went over this last week. The timeline walks us through where we're at and where we are going. We have accomplished several meetings. Last week, we had our first official subcommittee meetings, and we'll report out just shortly here. And we're back together here as the task force. And then next week, we'll be back at it on the 27th, and with the subcommittee conversations. I would be remiss if I didn't introduce Councilwoman Searcy. Councilwoman, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you all. We appreciate you being here. I'm going to pass it over to you to extend remarks.
Great. Well, thank you all again for taking time out. I know today is a difficult one, as we have yet another Black man killed the hands of police, and having to go through the agony of trying to wait for verdicts around guilt or innocence, even in cases where there's video that shows everything that transpired. So I appreciate you all continuing to devote time and energy on this effort. One of the things that I do want to make sure that everyone on the task force is aware of, and that is the City Council has began conversations regarding our FY22 budget. And I know that the city manager has provided a little overview of our budget. We've provided you with a link to the full budget. And the council is currently going through things right now. But one of the things that I do want to encourage you all to do as you are exploring, and coming up with recommendations, is to think about your recommendations first, right? So what I want to encourage everyone to do is to prioritize your recommendations, and then rely on the council to identify ways in which to fund those recommendations. And I say that because there are a number of areas that I want to make sure that we are able to cover in this through this task force. And I have a bit of a laundry list, and I just want to make sure that you all are aware, based on notes that I've heard from my colleagues on council, as well as, as we were developing the framework for this effort. So for example, which you all are already covering in subcommittees, alternative approaches for mental health service calls, alternative approaches and models for calls that relate to homelessness and evictions, review of our other housing related efforts, such as code enforcement and neighborhood services. How does that fit into aspects of public safety? I believe that there are some of you that are already looking at police training and our training programs, and there's some materials that have been provided there. Also a review of some of our policies regarding special teams, such as K9 units and SWAT teams. As well as, I know that it's already in your folder of materials. The chief has already issued a letter last year about our stance on 8 Can't Wait, and the fact that our police department embodies those principles. But I also want to still encourage folks to be mindful of the city's policies regarding use of force, as well as how they may relate to various changes that are happening at the state level. We're also having conversations with our district delegation. I believe David Moon will be available to talk to you all about changes that are happening at the state level. So we're working on organizing that. And then, also performance assessment, recruitment, retention of police staff. How does that work? What current policies do we have in place? And others have already mentioned, aspects related to communications, process, and tools. So how are we communicating with the community around crime, data that's available? Also, how are we communicating with our youth? How are we making sure that our youth don't feel fearful of our police department? And how do we make sure that communication is open and clear and is not biased? So I know that that's a bit of a laundry list, and I apologize for that. But I do want to take a minute to just kind of talk a little bit about the process, but also talk a little bit about some of the areas that have been discussed amongst the council over the last year or so, just to make you all aware of some of the things that we've been considering. And I think there are some questions in the chat, and I'm happy to take them. I defer to Link on how you all want to facilitate the Q&A.
Madam Councilwoman, if you would like to go through with the Q&A, we can definitely do so. Michael Rubin proposed in the chat, not sure why there is an increase of 7% in the Takoma Park Police budget while the task force is doing this work. Councilwoman, can you speak to that, please?
Sure. I can take a look at that percentage increase. Just keep in mind that sometimes we're estimating union salaries and things. So there's usually a little bit of extra room in that regard, but I could follow up with our city manager to see why there's that difference. But I will say in prior budgets, especially those areas where it is very staff heavy, there are usually estimates that you have to make in terms of salary, cost of living increases, benefit, insurance costs, things like that you kind of have to estimate when you're developing the budget. And that usually enters into union negotiations and things of that regard before you get those final numbers. So they're usually on the proposed budget a little higher than what they actually end up being. But again, I can follow up with our city manager and we can definitely schedule a little time for to walk through with you all a little bit more about the police budget and give you that general overview. Sometimes the proposed budget is hard to see how there's union negotiations and things that happen after perhaps a budget is initially proposed, but I could have the city manager walk through that. I hope that answers your question.
Does anyone have any other questions for the council? Seeing none, wonderful. Councilwoman, anything else that you have to provide for us?
No, I think that's it. And again, I truly appreciate all of the work that you all have undertaken thus far. And if there's anything that we can do to help make this easier for you all, again, the mayor has been here, I've been here. but other members on council are committed to this process as well. And so if there's any additional resources that we can provide to you all or things that you need, please don't hesitate to ask.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilwoman. All right, Molly, can you cue back up the deck for us, please? Thank you, Molly. The next, we're going to go back up. Yep, this is right where we're jumping back in. So we have the listening session coming up on Thursday, April 28th, 2021. It will be from 5:30 to 7 p.m. Like a standard meeting. If you click the link, it takes you to a registration link on the Takoma Park website. This is the flyer that we are distributing. Please share with your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors, so that folks can come and take part in the listening session. Or you can send them to bit.ly/Takoma Public Safety. It is case sensitive, all lowercase, and that'll take them directly to the RSVP link. Next slide.
Is that, I'm assuming that'll be recorded as well, like the other
Yes.
sessions are?
Yes, it will be.
Thanks.
For public comment, so that we can ensure that we have a public process, public comment can be found at the website seen here on the screen. Jamal will drop it in to the chat box, but again, please share with your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors, so that they can provide public comment on the process as well, so that we can incorporate that into our deliberation and discussion. Molly, next slide.
Devin, can I add one thing on that?
By all means, Michael.
Last week you asked what's the best way for the public to communicate with us as task force members. Just want to highlight that that's what that form is designed for. It's set up. We will collect all of the responses and share them with the task force before each meeting. So clearly, if something comes in that's urgent, we'll share it in real time. Otherwise, we'll batch all the responses. Make sure you have it far in advance of when we come together, so that you're getting that feedback in real time. Go ahead.
Okay. How can I, one quick question, can we also have the information sent to our email boxes so that we could send it out to a respective neighborhood listservs and folks like that?
Absolutely. We'll get
That
you
would be very helpful.
An email after tonight's meeting with the flyer attached, the registration for the listening session, and then also the link to the public comment form.
Perfect. Thank you.
Is it being shared in by non-electronic communications as well?
Yes. Yes. So the city has plans to ensure that this is distributed to various outlets throughout the city. Wonderful. Any other questions? Great. Next slide, Molly. The table of contents is available at the link provided here. This is the table of contents to all of the information that we sent to you earlier this year during the beginning of the session. Jamal dropped the link into the chat. But as you take a look and walk through the table of contents, you'll see that there are several resources within this folder. From the City of Takoma Park, you have the community survey, you'll have the impact of COVID-19 fact sheet, you'll have the adopted budget from fiscal year 21, you'll have the housing and economic data analysis, you'll have the focus group report out, you'll have the Takoma Park report results from 2019, and the strategic plan and draft form. You'll have police department documents as well. As you'll see the 2020 annual report final. You'll see the utility brochures and a number of other documents, in addition to external task force resources as well. The Arlington Police Subcommittee, CAHOOTS in Eugene, Oregon, the Council on Criminal Justice as well, among other documents. So if you have any questions with regards to what's in the table of contents or what's in the folder, please feel free to send us a line, send us an email, and we'll be sure to provide some information around that. Molly, I think we are good to go here. And lastly, the rules of roads, my apologies. You all know this, but we'll show it once again. Today, especially enter with curiosity, have deep conversation, use the space to gather your thoughts, speak in rough draft. It's okay to use I statements and assume good intentions among the others. Jamal, I'm going to turn it over to you to lead us through a conversation around the subcommittee report outs.
So what we're going to do now is kind of give an overview of what was discussed in our subcommittees. So for those of you all who are designated as a citizen lead for your subcommittee, this will be the opportunity for you to get your notes and things together to share on behalf of the subcommittee. But overall, what we want to do here is just to give you all an overview from other subcommittees to talk about this is what we discussed. Here's some of the things we want to focus on, and kind of be a report out so other folks within this committee can within the full task force can hear what we're talking about in our subcommittees. So Molly, I guess we can go back to sharing the slide again, so we can kick it off with community quality of life and Sawa. I'll hand it over to you to give your subcommittee report out.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I just got home, so forgive me if I have a blunder. So basically what we spoke about was, so we'll be covering information pertaining to housing, health, and social services in Takoma Park. We discussed, let's say, how to handle non-emergency situations. So we spoke about, let's just say, we'll call it a community health worker, like my job title, in case there was an emergency, who would you call? So we spoke about that. We also spoke about, for me, what I'm most interested in is improving the quality of life in, renters, the apartments, the standards of living. Like I mentioned before, I am a little bit concerned in like how we get them to be involved. I'm more involved and engaged, but like for most renters, they're not as engaged, and I would like for that to happen. And in terms of having some sort of improving the quality of life in the apartments, like I mentioned, just because I've seen some things that I'm a little bit concerned about. So that's one of the things that we would like to discuss. I'm wondering if my team, if I'm missing any more information, but we took some time while we were discussing, even though it's just very short. But what we would like to do is really try to get the inputs of non-government workers like renters, and we would like to interview the mayor, city council, and city manager, just to see what are the concerns in the neighborhood of the constituents. What are they most concerned about? What do they call about, especially during COVID? What were people calling about? Was it about like food? Is it housing? Are people getting evicted? So different things like that is what I would like to, information I would like to get. And I would like to interview mainly the city council, just to see how do they tackle different concerns within the community. Like if somebody has a concern, how do you go about it, and how do you resolve it, and what measures are we putting in place to conquer that? So I think that's one of the things we spoke about. I'm wondering if I missed anything else. Team, did I skip over anything, Dwayne?
Go
ahead.
I was just going to say, it looks like there are some of the things that additional things that we discussed that's up on the screen right now, some of the themes, including programmatic reforms associated with budget allocations to effectively respond to nonviolent occurrences, thinking about mental health related issues when talking about nonviolent occurrences. When a person is in mental health distress, what are the programmatic and budgetary allocations to respond to those things? Police department oversight. This was a question that we had just in regards to the jurisdiction to act, an authority that other police departments may or may not have to act within Takoma Park. How to how that's addressed, how it's not addressed in the city, the policies and procedures around that. And then community and city agency coordination to maintain timely and effective communication from the community to city agencies and from those agencies back to the community. One common theme that I have seen, and I think we talked about within our group, is communication from the city's city government agencies, particularly the police department, the resources they have to the community, and then also understanding what the community needs and how they're able to communicate those needs to Takoma Park city agencies. So those are a few more of the themes that again were up on the screen that we also talked about during our subgroup meeting.
And a good thing about these report outs is there will be some overlap, and you'll hear some of the things mentioned around, especially around communication in subcommittee group 3 report out. So team 1 on community quality of life. Any other things you all want to add, Jevin, team?
Great report, Alsawa and Dwayne. Thank you so much for chiming in. We covered the broad overreaching themes, and then we also had some additional questions to be answered. And so just highlighting that, specifically focused around mental health resources, who is handling referrals to the city? If it involves the police department, is the officer involved? Is the city involved? What does follow-up look like? And then the only other item that wasn't the touch was, in addition to understanding more about nonviolent or mental health crisis calls or service that are provided from the city, what are the number of those calls, or how many by a percentage basis of those calls come into the 911 emergency line? Outside of that, Sawa, Dwayne, you all covered it all. Thank you very much for your report out. Jamal, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
I see a hand raised. Jumana, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I know we had talked about also hearing from sort of outside issue experts, and I emailed all of you earlier today, but I would love for us to hear from Dara Baldwin with the Center for Disability Rights. She's someone who has a great deal of expertise who will tell you that police encounters is not just about mental health issues, but the whole panoply. Part of the reason I'm focused on it, she does a lot of work on policing. She is one of the conveners of the Transportation Equity Caucus. And I know from having spoken with her that, you know, the cahoots model is not one that's necessarily supported by the disability rights community. So I think it would be really critical to get that perspective. I know she testified before DC as they were sort of talking through what their policing will look like. So I sent you all that information, and I hope we have an opportunity to hear from her as we consider these reforms, someone who sort of knows and understands these issues deeply from the disability rights perspective.
Thank you for that. And that's noted. Any other questions or feedback from group 1, community quality of life? Awesome. Molly, next slide, please. So group 2, alternative methods and responses. The subcommittee will assess Takoma Park's current policing practices for emergency and non-emergency calls, including calls related to mental health. Also, this subcommittee will compare and contrast new potential approaches and best practices that may apply to Takoma Park. Facilitator Cordell Cotter and the committee members Michael, Jide, Sadie, Cedric, and Sitalali. Who wants to report out? I'll hand it over to Cordell.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. We haven't designated a task force lead yet, but we will. So ladies and gentlemen from our task force, please be prepared for an email request to that effect. This committee had a pretty robust discussion. You can go to the next slide, Molly, about, you know, what type of lessons are learned, what's successful out there, what are the right peers? You know, that's a big question. Takoma Park sits in such an odd setting, and that is bordered by various jurisdictions. And then you have the presence of armed federal officers as well that have a completely different authorization. And so there aren't many peers for a city like Takoma Park. And so we discussed the type of cities you want to compare yourself to. We have a list of those. I'll let the team speak to that, but I'll just go over the high level themes that we've covered in the first meeting. Successes and lessons learned from public safety programs established in similar cities, including relevant and valid metrics. There was a lot of discussion about dispatch and what are we learning from neighboring jurisdictions as it relates to how you handle a call, who decides who is dispatched to a particular issue. Is there any disaggregation on the type of issue for non-emergency issues? Also, there was some desire to dig into Takoma Park Police Department's hiring, training, especially as it relates to what type of grounding are they getting into race in policing, the history of that. And I know we heard from the chief that there absolutely is some stuff out there. We know that Montgomery County, as well as the District of Columbia, have distinct courses in their academy on it. And I believe Takoma Park does as well. So I suspect that we'll learn a whole lot as we start to pour through the data that's already been received by us from the city. And then as we ask for more data, that will be helpful as well. Now I turn it over to the folks that were in a meeting, either Michael or G-Day, anyone else from our subcommittee have anything else to add? Sadie, anyone else?
Yeah, so this is just going off of the last point, just like adding some more notes that I have from our meeting. When talking about like tasking relative to actual demands, looking at like what the force size is, and is the force size adequate compared to our like relatively low violent crime rate, and then like what could be taken off of the hands of police officers so they can specifically deal with a few tasks, and like focus on those few tasks rather than have like organizing so many different things and needing to spread out, and looking at like what actually is the official mandate of police officers in Takoma Park, and then looking at, is that what they're actually doing, or are they doing more, or are they doing less?
Thank you for that. Cedric, I see you came off mute. Did you want to add anything?
No, she said she hit it right on the head. Then I think the other thing I would add, it just came to my mind, in our training within the police department, how much emphasis are we putting on de-escalate, and also at the same time with de-escalation, how much emphasis we putting on not getting to an escalating tipping point when we're dealing with the citizens of Takoma Park, or the citizens in general that move through Takoma Park? How's that emphasized in their training? The other part I thought about after our discussion was this, because I've been in law enforcement, a lot of times the communicator to the person you're communicating to is everything. And so I want to know that how are we in our training, how we're approaching that. And most of it is just everybody just wants respect. So if I come in a respectful manner, in most cases, I'm pretty much get a respectful response. Sometimes I won't. And then will I take it to another level, or keep it at a level which it is calming, to where we won't escalate it to where we get to a point where we get into a physical confrontation, a shooting, or anything in that manner. So I'm really want to look at the really training aspects of where we are, because for Takoma Park and them to be successful in the community that they oversee and protect, it's all going to be about communication at the end of the day. Communication and respect. And the last thing was Cordell, apparently when he was in Virginia, ran across a flyer, whatever, some information.
Yeah, 211.
Yes, I am really interested in seeing that. I know you sent a lot of stuff at us, but I've tried to scan. I've actually taken a lot of it and just printed it out, scanned through. I went through Prince George's County, I want to see that, because that might be something that really could help Takoma Park, and can simply be something can be implemented, and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. Yeah.
And briefly, just for the purposes of the broader audience, I'll explain what that was. My parents are ministers in Southern Virginia, and they have a variety of outreach programs coming from their place of worship. And when I was home for the anniversary beginning of the month, I saw this form 211. They kept referencing 211. I didn't know what they were talking about. Thought it was some new idiom that I just missed from not living there anymore. Turns out it's an actual program. And when you call it, is they basically do an assessment of your needs, and they start dispatching you to different resources around the region. And I just thought it was remarkable. And I referenced it in our task force meeting.
Yeah, because of our boundaries, I think that would be necessary for the Takoma Park because of so many surrounding boundaries that they, in different jurisdictions that they have to deal with. Having something like that may be able to make the Takoma Park, especially through the dispatch, more efficient if possible, and also get into precise and its precise attack on what they need to do as far as when they administer services to different situations out there. One of the questions I still have that I would have when we get with our group is that, do they have a program where officers in a, let's say in a general stop, and it's already escalated? Is there somebody that can respond who can actually help in de-escalating that situation before it goes any further? If an officer see something going south on him right in the beginning, can somebody else come in and be able to help out to de-escalate? Things of that nature are important. And a lot of precincts across the country don't have that. I do know of one jurisdiction that does have that. An officer will respond to anything that may de-escalate. They know who to call, and whether he's a sergeant, corporal, whatever, they can come because they are coming in and they have the temperament to deal with that type of situation. So things of that nature. That's it.
Great. Anyone else from our committee? Thank you all.
Thank you. Group 2. There's a question in the chat. Have you all looked, and this is for the entire subcommittee to answer, have you all looked at where, and this question is from Adam, have you all looked at where Takoma Park officers receive their training? I believe the city does not have its own police academy and instead sends its recruits to different county academies. So it might be important to see how training differs in those agencies. Any folks want to take a stab at answering that, or it's worth considering for subcommittee, or if you talked about it, who wants to touch on it?
The training goes to Montgomery County. They all come through that academy. And then for Bethesda, Rockville, and Gaithersburg, then they go back to their communities.
Thank you. Cedric, Jumana?
So I just have a question on that then. Is there any training beyond whatever happens in the academy that Takoma Park Police does themselves, or ads or whatever? Or is it just what they get at Montgomery County, then they come back and that's all the training and that's where any follow-up happens? Like, is there any distinct training that Takoma Park Police does in addition to the county training?
I think that if no one has an appropriate or factual answer, I think that's something we can ask the city to provide us with the list of the trainings that the officers partake in.
Yeah, we'll add that to our list. Thank you for that question.
I believe they provided in the packet the list of trainings they do, for whatever that's worth.
Which packet? I'm sorry, there's been a lot of.
Yeah, I know. I believe Chief Duvall sent a response to the council, and I think in the council he outlined the training practices for Takoma Park Police and what particular trainings I think each of their staff took and all of that.
Yeah, and it's also in the resource folder as I'm looking now at our guide outline. So if you all want to use the outline to see where in the resource folder, go from there. But if you click that link that I sent in the chat, you can get there. Awesome. Any other comments, questions, or Adam?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think that that written answer that the chief provided is where I remember seeing something about the counties. And I do think that the city sometimes sends its officers to Frederick, or there was some other county that the chief mentioned. So that, I think that's why I just wanted to flag it in case there's, you know, a particular county that does the sort of training that we think is appropriate and needed, then maybe we want to suggest to the police department, we'll only send them to Montgomery County, don't send them over here, right? Because really there's a state police accreditation agency, the Maryland Police Training Commission, and I think technically the officers could go anywhere in the state as long as they get certified. And then I think that, you know, Takoma Park can add whatever training it wants when they get back to the city.
Jamal, in that folder, if you go to City of Takoma Park, then Takoma Park PD documents, it's the one all the way at the bottom, TPPBD training 2019-2020 is the list of all the current trainings, but we can follow up and see if there's anything else, and then also address Adam's question as well.
Thank you, Michael. Cool. Any other questions, comments, or feedback for group 2? Awesome. Group 3, my subcommittee, the best one, community engagement and transparency. This subcommittee will evaluate practices and policies related to sharing data and budget information among the public, as well as efforts to engage community partners in public safety efforts. Additionally, the subcommittee will review existing efforts and consider new approaches to recruiting and retaining public safety professionals. So our team lead is Lauren. Lauren, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So we had our first meeting last week. And so we're really just getting started kind of examining what we want to do. But 3 main kind of points came up when we were talking last week. We were thinking about who we'd like to talk to and learn from, who we kind of want to invite in to hear from. So we're thinking maybe hearing from the Takoma Park City Communications Department. We're also kind of interested in hearing more about how, you know, rules are communicated to citizens who live in Takoma Park, and if they should be obligated to know these rules and where that really falls. We're kind of interested in, you know, what community members we can tap to hear from, people who are active, people who we can kind of reach out to, and really finding a way to get that input that's easy and accessible to the community, and not something they have to look for, something that's easily found and hopefully in multiple languages and in multiple places, and for them to be able to communicate with us. We also kind of talked about a citywide comprehensive alert system. Somebody mentioned Cahoots, which is used in some areas as a way to kind of immediately get that information out when something were to happen, if something occurs, that we wouldn't hear it later, and kind of ways to kind of opt into what information you want to receive. And so that's something that we're thinking about. Some additional data that we're interested in receiving is information on body camera usage, release of, you know, that information, and if officers review it before writing a report, and where that really falls in, and how that's communicated out to the community. Also interested in communication around traffic stops by race, the justification, and the outcomes. And really, from that information that the chief submitted, it was interesting to kind of see that some stops were for one thing, but then they kind of snowballed into something else. And so we kind of want to understand how that is really being decided and handled. And so we're also interested in the structure and the chain of command on how agencies communicate within the city and how they communicate out to the community as well. And we're also interested in, sorry, my dog is kind of going crazy a little bit right now. Again, this is my thing, my dog. We're interested in Takoma Park, like enforcement capabilities and policies and practices, and, you know, what discretion they have if they're required to, you know, if they're doing a traffic stop, if they're required to write a ticket, what discretion do they have around that, and how that is really kind of communicated to them and to the community as well. And so also we're interested in kind of brainstorming. Some of my ideas that I was brainstorming is what lines of communication that are available to the community. I'm kind of opening those up and getting input from other community members. I'm also interested in, I think our task force probably would be interested in the guidelines for timeliness of communication. If there's any information, if something happens, it has to be communicated to the public within a certain time frame, which might be very useful for people to know, as well as really focusing on being transparent. And I think us as a task force, we're really kind of conscious of being transparent, that we are, not holding information that only we know. We really want to, make sure that the information that is spread to the community. And I think this listening session is a really great way. If there could be a second thing where we can kind of communicate out as well, that might be useful too. And so those are my little points, and I'm really happy to open it up to the other task force members to really kind of anything that I missed, anything that you'd also like to share.
Thanks, Lauren. That's actually really comprehensive in terms of what we talked about. And I also just appreciate everybody for sort of showing up and getting on today, because I agree with Jamal. It is certainly the better of the two potential results, but there's a lot sort of wrapped up in it. So sort of showing up and doing the work in that context is really appreciated. On the point of transparency and of us being transparent, I know I've sort of raised this before in terms of the question of like, what relationship do we have, with the town, with the police department, with anything else that would afford us any extra information that was not allowed to be public. But more importantly, I continue to have a concern that the commission or the task force not be held up as sort of a sign of transparency, as a way of frustrating transparency. And I just say that because even in the aftermath of the shooting that happened across the street from my neighborhood, there's been a number of sort of conversations back and forth where people said, well, I've asked Chief Duvall all these questions. And he said, and this was something that came back to me, well, he said that the task force was going to be looking at the May 2020 incident that preceded the shootings. And like, I have no information that we're looking at that or have any sort of, oversight, anything. Like, I don't know, that's not been communicated to me in any way. And so, that we not be held up as a shield, but that the communication is really clear, so that there's not different conversations happening where community members might think that we have information or we have authorities that have neither been communicated to us, or we may not, and probably don't actually have. And so I think the consistency in communication, that was part of when we were talking about, like how do communications go out, and does anybody, does the police just do their own communications, and then there's somebody else who does communications for the city? Do they talk to each other? Is there a network? And that's before you get to the question of how people receive it. Is it accessible to them? Like that's an ongoing concern of mine. So I guess I would put that out as a question to be answered, but also, part of true transparency is that having a task force with community members on it does not equate to transparency or substitute for transparency. And this is just me now adding one of the things that I've asked for a few times is I'd really like to see a line by line of the police budget, right? Like I get Councilwoman Searcy's explanation of why you have to sort of guess at, what it's going to look like with union negotiations and COLA and other things that might come up. But I don't feel like we've had the opportunity to really understand where they're spending the money outside of those questions. And I think it would be really critical for us to know that going forward.
You're on mute, Jamal.
No, I was just saying that those are all good questions that you raise and concerns raised, and I think within our subcommittee, I think that's something we can tackle within the subcommittee, but also as a full group going forward, and better knows into the discussion. Any other folks from subcommittee 3 want to raise some feedback that we talked about? Only other thing that I would add, when you killed it, snaps. I would just add that that we talked a lot about website navigation and getting through the website and improving the readability, but also navigation and finding things on the site. So that's also something we're going to look into. Anybody else from group 3? Told you all we were the best group. Adam?
Yeah, just really quickly, I know I raised this at our subcommittee meeting, but I just wanted our group to think about the other areas that as a larger task force we want to address, but don't necessarily fit squarely into one of the definitions of subcommittees. And I'm looking at Councilwoman Searcy's list right now. And for example, there's a lot of stuff on there that to me doesn't obviously fall into any one of the three. So we may just want to have kind of a larger conversation about if we want to get to those things. And if so, do we want to do it as a larger group, or do we want to, say, okay, let's expand group 2 or 3 in certain ways and capture some of the things that are on that list.
Thank you. I think as an appropriate next step is we can, based on the councilwoman's list, we can discuss, I guess, if we all want to have that open discussion now, or something we can sit with as like a homework to fully digest that list and say, here's my recommendation on where things go, or even like, here's some recommendations on how we can move forward with it. And if those are things that we want to discuss as full task force members, as a full task force group, we can even pick that up as well. Team, any thoughts around that?
The only thing I would add is the subcommittees are an attempt to cover more information, not less. So one of the things that's going to be really important when we're in some subcommittees is saying, actually, we as a task force want to do this together. We want to get all of us together on a screen and we want to go line by line through this, versus let's assign 3 or 4 people to sit down with the city administrator and go line by line through a budget document and report that back to us. All of you are in different places on how detailed you want to get on certain places. So let's use the task force structure and the subcommittee structure in a way that allows us to cover the most ground, but without being limiting in any sort of way. And Adam's right, some of these aren't going to fit neatly in any 3 of the subcommittees. And in those moments, we'll either have to expand the scope of some of the subcommittees or just decide to tackle those issues as a full task force. And I want to make sure we leave room for that as we move forward. Does that all make sense?
Yeah. Yep, and I think that's what this full group discussion we can kind of jump into. Like, there's clearly some common themes, and I think there's some things we can build upon, especially after seeing the list that Councilwoman laid out. But we can jump a bit into that discussion. Michael Rubin, to you.
Just a question, I guess, of where something would lie. So I think it gets into what Jumana said a couple minutes ago about comments potentially made by Chief Duval. But I think in terms of like how we evaluate the police when things don't go right, like we know the recent murders, and then there was the previous May incident with the homeless woman. And, if we believe that maybe, one potential option is for an independent investigation of Takoma Park Police and their responses last May, could it have prevented the 2 murders that happened recently? That type of thing. I think one of the subcommittees needs to be looking at how we evaluate police and when we get independent, investigations of potential misdoing, or wrongdoing by officers, so we can improve. I mean, not to just put people like out to dry, but just so we don't have these types of things happen again. I think that's too important given how timely it is right now. And we have to just make sure it sits in one of the 3 groups, I think.
Yeah.
So that's all.
Yep. And I would also emphasize, like, there may be a likelihood that we're going to come up with recommendations that don't fit in any 3 of those categories, and that's fine. Right. But I think long as we create the space to deliberate it, to ensure that that's something that the entire task force wants to focus on and provide as a recommendation, then we can do that. Any other comments about subcommittees, the report out, and kind of focus moving forward? I do see some questions in the chat about budgeting. Thank you, Michael, for that response. And again, we're with you all on this. So we've also been having active discussions about, like Michael said, for some folks on different levels. Some folks want that deep dive into budget and to talk with the city manager about that. Some folks are like, just give me the big picture, but let me be more creative. I also want to emphasize something that what Councilwoman mentioned earlier, is that we also don't want to get to a point where we're spending too much time on saying, let's take away from this budget or figuring out how the funding is going to work. More so, let's come up with the recommendations on what needs to be done. And Councilwoman can speak more to that. But I know the city wants us to focus on coming up with those recommendations, and the budget and the funding can be figured out. Awesome. Any other comments before we move on?
Yeah, I guess that sparked something within me. Sorry to jump in. I think that and there are many of us on this call who spend our life in nonprofits, and, including myself. And I think we've all written a lot of reports. Something you just said sort of hit a point for me. Is the easiest way for us to do is come out of this with a lot of general recommendations that have a lot of applicability to a lot of situations. There's advantages to that in that, they can have broad applicability and we can sort of pat ourselves on the back and say we did a good job and move on. But I think, if we really want to hold the city accountable, there's power in specificity. And I know that Jamal wasn't saying the opposite, but it sort of sparked this in me, is that, if we do come up with really specific recommendations that, there should be a 3% cut to the budget. I'm just making this up. We haven't done the work yet. And these are 6 different programs that can be eliminated to get the 3% budget. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be pushback. People are going to say, look, you're just a group that came together, for a number of weeks, once a week. But also there's real accountability in giving specific recommendations if they're not followed through on.
Yep. No, well received. And I guess what I want the picture to paint that I was trying to relay is that we want the these subcommittees and this focus group to come up with the recommendations as specific or as general as they are. But however, not come up with the recommendations and say, okay, we may not be able to do that, or we may be able to do this, but there may be some limitations. But I do want folks to kind of put a pin into that, in saying that we can get as specific as possible, or we can be as broad as possible within our recommendations.
Yep, and I think I wasn't, and I apologize if I.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
I wasn't trying to push back on anything you were saying. I think sometimes somebody says something and it sparks something in my mind, and that's what happened there.
It's like a light bulb.
And Ajmal, as we start writing the report, which is going to start, we're going to collectively start outlining what these themes are going to look like over the next couple of weeks. So we start knowing where the data is needed. What I heard from some of what the council member laid out, and we're facilitating these types of task forces all over the country, and we're seeing lots of different versions of that. So we're always, as much as we're able to, willing to share what we're seeing other groups getting stuck on and where other groups are making really interesting progress. I can't share the city, but there's a group we've been working with that started with an idea that we don't want police responding to mental health related service calls. That's kind of where it started. Then it became, we want to embed mental health professionals with the police department for those calls. Then it became, we don't have enough mental health providers in town that can do that, and our contracts aren't structured to allow it. So what we're going to do is utilize two-way body cameras so that we have 24/7 mental health resources, that anytime an officer responds to something that's clearly a mental health issue, the camera has to be on, they have to be in the ear talking to a mental health provider who then takes over the care of that case through the officer. It's a very detailed example, but at any one of the points, if those recommendations would have said, police can do this or can't do this, or we can do this, there was a lot of reasons to get to know really quickly. Well, we can't possibly do that. When it became, well, what can we do? They actually started making some progress towards a solution. So we want to come out of a very limited time scope here with what are we trying to solve for? What level of specificity will demand accountability, but that will also allow the work to happen to figure out the solution. Is that helpful at all in terms of framing?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. And without sort of getting into the substance of the solution you're talking about, I think it's a long-term organizing and strategy question. I mean, I see your perspective. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. I think that, what you proposed is looking at things in an effective, but from my opinion, pretty short-term perspective. I think if a longer, and there are pros and cons to this. I mean, so I think if you have a longer-term perspective where, if there's not action on the recommendations, there can be consequences for people who don't take action on them, and you're working towards necessarily getting people who will take action on them. I don't want to sound too revolutionary, but I think there's pros and cons that have to be balanced in terms of to what extent you compromise your recommendations, get short-term solutions. And I don't honestly don't have defined thoughts on that. I think it probably depends upon the specific subject matter and the importance of the specific topic that you're proposing, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. But before we hand it over to Deputy City Manager Jessica Clarke, any other folks have feedback or things they want to share before we jump into the next piece of this agenda? Awesome. Deputy Manager Clarke.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just here to reiterate on behalf of City Manager Ludlow and Chief Duvall that the City Manager, myself, and Chief are here and ready and willing to get you the information you need and to connect you with any city staff that you'd like to talk with. So I heard that one of the subcommittees would like to speak with our communications specialists. Let's get that set up. We're here. I know that you have a lot of material in your resource folders, some of which the police department put there, some of which other departments put there, but a lot of times it helps just to have someone walk you through it so you don't have to wade through pages and pages. So we're ready to do that. Also coming up for your next full task force meeting, Chief Duvall will be presenting in pretty much the same format that he did the traffic data, the arrest data. And we'll be working to get that out to you in advance, both as a Microsoft Word document as well as an interactive website. So I hope you all were able to access the traffic data interactive website already and didn't have any trouble with that. If you did, let me know. Otherwise, we'll be sending you another interactive website as well as report on the arrest data, obviously disaggregated by year, sex, age, race and ethnicity, etc. So looking forward to that presentation from Chief Duvall. But we're here and ready to meet with any subcommittee members to get you the information you need as quickly as possible. So thank you all again so much for your service. And I'm happy to take any questions as well.
I'm sorry, I'm on phone now. This is Jumana. Can I ask a question?
You may.
So I know Chief Duvall is going to be back with us, but I do have the question about communications around incidents like this. And I can't vouch for it because I've not been in communications, but hearing from other people that we as a task force are going to be having some oversight over incidents or what's been going on when none of that's been communicated. I don't know if there's a way to clarify that or to ensure that there's consistency in what message is going to other people versus, what we understand our mission to be. But I would love that clarified.
Sure, we can certainly clarify that for you in a follow-up email.
Thank you.
So before I toss it over to Michael Aiken to walk us through the public listening session piece, any final questions for Deputy City Manager Clarke? Awesome. Mr. Aiken, take it away. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Mr. Holtz. And this is our last section, and then we'll get people on with their evenings. We have got our public listening session coming up. Public input has been a key since the start of the work together at the stakeholder audit report that we shared earlier today. One of the key themes from the very beginning, from the focus groups, et cetera, was making sure we could get as much public input as possible. I know the current format has made that a little difficult, so we want to make sure we really use this listening session, both in a way that's promoting people to come to it, but also when they're here, that we're getting the most meaningful type of feedback for each of you as task force members. So as we put together how that will flow, we really would like to get some feedback and have a facilitated discussion now on what type of public feedback is most helpful to you. Do you want to set this up as a true listening session where we're structuring it as that? This is a space to share and task force members will listen. Do you as task force members want to participate in that meeting where you outline some of what the subcommittees have been looking at so far and ask specifically for feedback on specific items? Do you want the public officials to have a role in this meeting? Is it helpful if the mayor and the city administrator, et cetera, and the council member kind of explain the charge and what the task force has been asked to do? We're really setting this up as your listening session, so we'd love to know what feels right in that session. What level of interactivity do you want? Is it helpful to be able to follow up on questions as they're asked? Or do we want to do it more as someone submits in the chat box, we read it out and make sure that it's heard? So that's what I'm looking for in the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, is just some feedback on what's most helpful to you as task force members. We will then build out basically a run of show for how the meeting will go format wise and share that with all of you with plenty of time to provide feedback before the meeting happens. So go ahead and use hand raise feature or just come off mute and let us know what you're thinking. What is most helpful?
I mean, is it possible to get subject matter experts, have them on the bench for each of these sessions, breakouts?
Mm-hmm.
Pre-designated, and maybe have them send any documentation on questions we may have beforehand?
Got it. So for future kind of subcommittee meetings, making sure we have access to the folks that we might need.
Yeah.
Yep, we can absolutely do that. And part of what we're doing is putting together a schedule of all the different SMEs requested and the type of data that's been requested, so we know when that's coming. So we can certainly do that.
I mean, it seems like there have been a decent number of questions around police training, so hopefully we can have that discussion.
Yep, absolutely. For the public listening session, do you have the sense, you're out there, you're the community ambassadors to this group, do you get the sense that there are things that haven't been said yet and haven't been heard yet? So we need to make sure we're just providing space for people to speak their truth, or do we want to ask for feedback from the public on really specific questions at this point? What is most helpful?
Sorry for jumping in again without raising my hand, just because I'm on the phone and I can't see it all. Just 2 questions. I did look quickly at the list of trainings that were in there. And then on my quick review, I understand, I fully get that I was totally quick and while I was still on the Zoom, but it didn't seem to appear it said who was doing the training necessarily, just what the training was. So I don't know if there's a way of finding that out, but I would love to know that. And I think my only comment on the community question is, I kind of feel like after all that happened, everything that's happened since this task force was brought together has brought out a lot more questions that people have. And so I feel like even though there was, certainly information gathering that you all did ahead of time, that there's a lot of thinking that has changed, or different sort of thoughts and opinions that are going on now that were happening when this was coming together. And I think that there needs to be space held for that.
Got it. Thank you very much. Absolutely. Other thoughts? Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, just a question for you, Michael, because I know you've said a number of times that your team has either facilitated these sorts of projects in other places or studied them. Have there been these sorts of listening sessions, and how have they gone? That might be helpful for us to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got 2 built into the timeline we're doing together here. One of them is more of a, we don't want to come to the community with everything figured out. We really want a listening session. The second one is we now have some recommendations that we're coalescing around as a task force. Let's vet those out in the community and get feedback on specific proposals. That meeting, which will be a month or so from now, is actually the easier meeting to format around because we have specific things we're asking for feedback for. On this kind of first session, there are generally 2 ways these can go. Either people feel like they have not had an ability to present their actual thoughts to the group that's formulating these decisions. And it's really helpful to open up some space for that, either through chat or through email or through live interaction. Speak your truth, define public safety, what that means, and what is your charge to the task force members who are carrying this forward. That can work if we get a sense that there are a lot of people who are looking to express views that way. The more typical way we've seen it is that we give people really specific prompts. So we say, this group came together, we did some stakeholder audits, we heard this type of stuff. One of the things that we really want to dig in on is, what does public safety mean? You community member who's tuning in, as you define public safety, what does that mean in your reality? And then open up some space for people to answer a specific question, which is often safer for individuals than just an open-ended, what do you want me to say? So we could pose a few different questions and we could kind of break them out by the subcommittee structure. What is your basic feedback on communication? How is the communication going? Where do you get your information? And treat it almost as a community focus group. And that generally gets us more specific feedback if overall you're comfortable with that. Does that sound right? If you're looking for recommendations, because I know it can be a little hard to just throw out there what you're looking, we would recommend that we don't treat it fully as we're here as the task force, what do you want us to know? That's a little too open-ended, and it doesn't give people kind of the safety of providing feedback and the comfort of how they most want to provide that. So we would recommend that there be some very short presentation at the front, almost how we open these meetings. This is how we got here. This is where we are in the timeline, and this is where we're going. Then we would want a very specific, this is how your feedback will be used by the task force. Here's our structure of subcommittees and the types of issues we're tackling. We'd now like to get feedback on these specific issues. Then we would open up the forum to either a chat-based or come off mute and ask your question this way if you'd prefer, and facilitate a dialogue that way. That would be our recommendation. We just want to make sure that feels right to the group. Does that feel right? Does anything not feel right with that? Otherwise, we'll type that out, give you a run of show, and send it around for some feedback after you've had a little bit of time to process it. That sound good? We're just all ready to be off Zoom after a very long day, and I get that. Council member, anything from your perspective that's needed from a public listening session that would be helpful to you as this task force continues?
No, Michael, I mean, what you've outlined works well. I think, providing residents with an opportunity to have direct access to you all is going to be important. I think it'll also be helpful that we're doing it at this stage before we've to inform what future recommendations might be. There are a number of folks in our community that have thoughts around certain aspects that's currently being discussed now. So it will be helpful to hear from people. Just as a reminder, we also have the web-based comment portal that folks can provide feedback online, and so that's another vehicle as well. And I'm happy to continue to promote not only the listening session, but also that residents provide any comments that they would like to send directly to you all through that portal. So just as a reminder that these listening sessions are not the only way that you all will get feedback. If you are interested in meeting with groups of residents, we can do that. But we also have this online ability for folks to provide comments and feedback as well.
Perfect. Thank you, council member.
Sure.
And then Jessica, just before you joined, there was a recommendation that we make sure that we're not just advertising it through digital channels, that we try and get the flyer out in some paper form to the places that may not be as digitally connected. And we said that, of course, we'll work with you on doing that. Just wanted to make sure.
Sounds great. Yep, we were planning on that.
Perfect. Any other feedback? Otherwise, we'll draft up a basic format for it, send it back to you for feedback, and get ready for that meeting next week. Perfect. Jevon, I'm going to toss it back to you to close this out. Good, sir.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, task force members. Our goal today is to give you a few minutes back in your day. So block your calendars off, as you know, through the calendars that we've gone over. We'll be back here next Tuesday, April 27th at 5:30 p.m. We'll send you details ahead of time. We'll type up the run of show and get that out to you so you can take a look at that, and we'll continue to go from there. One thing that I will add, this is a very, very heavy day. It's been a very, very heavy week and a very, very heavy month and a very, very heavy year. coupled with everything else going around it. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your commitment to this cause. Dr. King says that the moral arc of the universe is long and it bends towards justice. But the only way that that arc bends towards justice is if each and every one of us pulls on it. So thank you for doing your part and participating in the process. My gift to you is that you're going to get 16 minutes back into your day. So have a good rest of your evening, enjoy yourself, and we will see you next week. Have a great one, everybody.
Goodbye.